Hey, welcome back, friends, to another broadcast of In the Trenches, the show some people are calling the best thing since NASA hired Don Petit. Today, we have a very special episode. But first, quick shout out to Sir VB for his 5-star review on iTunes. He had this to say about In the Trenches, quote, Tom has a down-to-earth approach to interviewing and gaining insights from great guests. In the Trenches is a great listen with practical advice. Highly recommend. Thanks, VB. Appreciate you. In today's broadcast, I sit down with real estate investor and coach Chris Prefontaine. After many years of doing independent deals and coaching other real estate investors himself, Chris Prefontaine founded Smart Real Estate Coach in 2014, bringing in his son Nick, daughter Kayla, and son-in-law Zachary to help grow the company. Chris and his family team coach investors on how to properly scale and automate their real estate investing businesses throughout North America, all without using their own cash, credit, or taking out bank loans to buy property. Chris and his family buy and sell homes in their own market every month and then mentor, coach, and consult students and associates all around North America to do the exact same thing. And that's how they stay current, because they're actually in the trenches themselves. So, of course, what an appropriate person to have on the show with us today. And on today's call, Chris and I talk about real estate investing during a pandemic, the do's and don'ts, how to buy a property with no money down or credit, the real estate outlook into late 2020 and beyond, what economic forces will come into play in the next 6 months and how to capitalize on them, or at least how not to lose your shirt. Why making deals outside of the conventional loan system is more and more appealing for both buyers and sellers, and much more. Listen, if you enjoyed today's show, please do me a favor, leave a rating or review on iTunes, Spotify, Google Play, or your podcasting platform of choice. We're on all of them to the best of my knowledge, and if we're not, shoot me an email over at tom@tomworks.com and we'll get that fixed ASAP. I appreciate you listening and hope you get a ton of value out of today's broadcasts. So without further ado, let's get to the conversation. So Chris, before we dive into real estate on your terms and some of the stuff you're doing with investing in real estate right now and that you're teaching others to do, let's take a few steps back. How'd you get to what you're doing today? I'm pretty sure you weathered the storm about a decade ago through the real estate crash, and maybe it even starts before that. But how'd you make your way into real estate, and what have you learned through that?
Yeah, so it was actually 1991, so almost 30 years. The start was building some single family homes. I had never been a builder, but teamed up with someone that was in that field. Stuck a bunch of signs out on lot owners' property with their permission to pre-sell homes, and then ended up building the home and paying the owner only at the end of the deal once everything was built and funded. So it was pretty unique. Without knowing we were doing terms. Then I bought a Realty Executives franchise, sold that to Coldwell Banker in 2000. From 2000 till the crash that you just alluded to, doing our own deals, really, construction, raise the roof, condominium conversions, a little of everything. The only thing we didn't touch is large apartments. I still don't. And then that led to what you just said, the lovely 2008 debacle. That, in hindsight, is why we're doing what we're doing today and why we built the model we built today. So I'm thankful for it, but you couldn't have convinced me of that back then.
So we'll jump around a little bit because I think there's some learning lessons from your career earlier, and especially like in the 90s and the 2000s into what you're doing today. So I will jump around a little bit here, but I hope it makes sense as I ask these questions. But I'm kind of curious. So you mentioned that like these experiences have you've adjusted your model and how you invest or how you approach investing. Can you give me an idea of what that meant before and what that means after, like now versus what it was before?
Yeah, very applicable. So before it was real conventional, like most, we speak at RIAs. We used to speak on the country, now it's virtual, but when we speak, we hear people saying, well, yeah, I'm saving up for my next property, or I'm putting down X amount and going for a conventional loan because money's so cheap. Okay, that's all cool, but you have to sign personally.
Yeah.
So prior to 2008, it was signing personally on properties. And I don't care how good you think you are or how good your credit is. It doesn't matter when there's a market dip. The bank's coming looking for you. And you get everything at risk. And so after the crash, we said, okay, if we were to go back to real estate, we were so beat up, what would it look like? And so all the things we were challenged by, we said, let's not do them. Let's not take out bank loans. Let's not sign personally. Let's not go out and raise investor money because that's more stress. Let's just not do that. Let's buy everything on terms. So that's what we built. We've trademarked some of those systems that we've built, but we've built it all to be as recession resistant as possible. I won't say proof. I don't think anyone can say that, but recession resistant. And then not knowing that obviously everybody would be hit by COVID, that came along and it's another storm, but the model was built to weather the storm. So we didn't just survive during this, but we thrived. And so did our students, like 3 times we run a business because there's a whole bunch of people that need our help right now. So it's a very positive thing. I had someone on my show before coming on your show, and they said, well, we're doing well, but we don't like to say it around our friends. And I said, why not? You're doing well because you're helping a lot of people. You wouldn't be doing well. So that same goes for our model.
And so with this model, how do you set it up exactly? And I know you have like obviously courses, programs, coaching for this, but if you can zoom in on it, kind of the basics, at least like the foundational elements, how do you have to think about investing in real estate? Because I agree, I have a little bit of experience. I don't know how much people have in terms of experience with real estate investing who are listening. So they might be starting from absolute scratch. And I think, I think most people think about, I get a loan and probably understand the concept of leverage. But at the same time, that's maybe as far as we go for most people. And even that proposition is very scary because of some of the crashes we've had and whatever this thing is, building up to be, right?
Yeah.
So like anybody who's overly leveraged, it's kind of might be some concerning times here. But zoom in, give me an idea or zoom out what your structure is for this and how you approach it.
Yeah. So thank you for reeling that back in. So when I say terms, I'm talking about one of 3 things, and one is a little bit more advanced. So we'll go with the first 2. But the first 2 would be lease purchase. So you as an investor buying the seller's home, lease purchase, and or owner financing. I know some people are okay with the word owner financing, but it means so many different things. So let me define these 2 for you. The owner financing to me, to us as a team, is a niche owner financing, which is just with properties that are free and clear. So there's about a third of the properties in the United States that are free and clear. We look for those or seek those out more aggressively depending on what market and what student it is with. And then we structure usually full price offers because they are debt free. They're looking for price as long as they'll give us a long enough term, because the punchline is we're making monthly principal payments to that seller. So instead of bringing bank money to the table, the seller said, in essence, I'll be the bank. And we structure monthly payment that we're comfortable with, they're comfortable with, but it's all principal. So they get a premium price, but we're getting principal hammered down every single month, which is a tremendous recession-resistant tool. So that's the owner financing model as far as buying. On the lease purchase, we talk to a seller, and again, there's different scenarios. Someone can be over-leveraged, under-leveraged, a lot of equity. But we talk to a seller, let's say with a little equity, let's say that's you, Tom, and let's say you and I agree your house is worth 300, just for this model, this discussion. And let's say you have a 50 grand equity or 250. A lease purchase says, I'm going to take over the underlying debt that's in your name. I'm just going to make the payment on your behalf. That doesn't change. I don't go on any loans. And I'm going to, at the end of the term, unless you use 3 years for a term, at the end of the lease purchase term, I'm going to pay off your $50,000 in equity that we guaranteed you at the beginning of the term, and we're going to pay off that underlying loan. But that underlying loan, remember, is no longer $250. It goes down every month, right? And any loan, even if it's amortized. So at the end of the term, we're going to pay off the loan, which is less than $250. So we benefit. We're going to give you your $50. How are we doing that? We're putting buyers in all of these homes that need time to get bank financing. And with COVID, it's just through the roof how many people need this vehicle. And so we're going to rent to own to them until they get financing and then pay everything off.
So with that one, it comes down to, so this sounds, I don't want to get too complex, but how does this relate to things like options and like buying homes with options and stuff like that, or investing with options? It sounds like it's kind of close. With lease to purchase, it kind of made me think a little bit of options, contracts and stuff like that.
Yeah, good question. So I can tell you one difference financially is when someone's doing options or flipping or wholesaling or any of the niches that I've been in, it's one deal, one check, right? Mm-hmm. One deal, one check. You flip an option or you do a wholesale. The difference with these is we trade 3 paydays per deal. And this is one of the things we've trademarked. So the first payday is my buyer is not a renter. My buyer is a true buyer that needs time to qualify, and they come in with a non-refundable down payment. The second payday is the difference between what I'm paying on the underlying debt or to the seller and what I'm getting from my buyer every month. That averages $300 to $1,000. Payday 2. Payday 3 is at the very end, I mark the house up at the beginning for that buyer, and I have the principal pay down. So all three paydays for that little deal I just described, on average for us is $75,000, 1 to 5 year terms. So you start parlaying 5, 6, 8, 10, 12 of those. You have a nice spreadsheet going with predictable income. And our students run 45,000 to 250,000 and up, but our average is on the lower side. Our family team is like 75.
And so it sounds like in that context, at least in the lease purchase, although it sounds like maybe you do this for the owner financing example too. There's like,
that's how we exit. Yeah.
Got it. Okay. So there's like kind of three parts of the equation. There's the owner of the property. There's you, then there's the buyer. Is that always the case, or how might it be organized? Could it just be you and the owner? It sounds like in the one case, the lease purchase, it was like somebody who had a hard time qualifying, say, for a typical mortgage and who had to rent to own until they could own it. So is that always part of the, yeah.
On the buyer's side, it's always going to be someone that can't qualify today, and it's not always credit. Sometimes it's what the bank calls seasoning. They're self-employed, and years ago, pre-08, you could go get what they called a stated income loan. They just literally state their income, no proof needed, and those aren't available. I mean, the product exists, but it's super expensive. So they go to the bank. Let's say they have good credit, and they have a good down, and all of a sudden they find out, well, I haven't bought a house in 10 years. You can't do that anymore. So they have to get what's called seasoning. That's usually a couple of years of proper income reporting. So they're a great buyer. A buyer that needs a little credit repair is a great buyer. But these are all buyers that need time for one thing or the other. On the selling side, a lease purchase, you're kind of in bed with that seller till the end of the term. It's their house. It's in their name. The mortgage is in their name. Whereas an owner financing deal, when they sell it to us, I own it. I have the deed. The only difference is they have a note on the property, a mortgage on the property like a bank.
And so hypothetically on their end, if you didn't pay, they'd be able to take the property back. Is that correct? Something like that? Well, like what's like in terms of that, like the safety net for that person who's selling in this context? What are the concerns or things we have to, not even necessarily concerns, but what are the things we have to factor in here? Like where could it go south? And what are the things you guys do or the stop loss things you put in place so that, well, I guess doesn't hit you too bad?
Yep, good question. So on the selling side, owner financing, depending on what state they live in, they could foreclose, obviously, just like any bank could.
Mm-hmm.
So we would forego anything we paid in all those months. But what's easier, and some states don't allow it, is if a seller or their attorney expresses a concern about that, it's usually you might not have done a good job credibility-wise, right? But if they do it, bring that up, then on a couple of occasions we've said, hey, no problem. We know what we do works. We perform what we say we're going to do. So let's put a deed in escrow back to you, Mr. Seller, so you don't have to foreclose. And that deed in escrow is accompanied by a simple default agreement, a few sentences that says, if I don't pay, you go record and you own the property now. There is no foreclosure.
Mm.
So all but one or two that I've run into state-wise, you can do that. And attorneys like it. Say, okay, great. So if they screw up, you ask without foreclosure expense.
Yep, that makes sense. Now, you also mentioned you can do this, and it's interesting because like the lease to purchase structure and kind of what you're doing here, when you describe it based on people who have like, say, a need and they just need time. Okay, so it's pretty obvious how that's appropriate to today's current environment. I think there's a lot of people who are on the credit side who have gone through, well, we'll just say, I don't know, I guess we could say bankruptcies, a lot of them, or have challenges with their credit because of that and have to wait years before they can take out like a new loan. So that's one group of people. You mentioned self-employed, people who might not have that typical, say, W-2 track record and who are interested in purchasing now. Outside of that, I'm kind of curious, like how do you go about setting up a deal like this? Because it's multifaceted. Like, do you go find the buyer first? Do you go find a person like this? Do you go find the property? How do you put it all together?
Yeah, we actually get the property first. Everyone asks this because, unfortunately, in most niches, like wholesale, I know teach that you have to build the buyers list first. Not the case here. And here's why. The tougher part is finding the property. And during COVID, that piece wasn't tough, but it's tough. It's the tougher part of the deal. So once you find the property, we market all of it online. My son is our in-house buyer specialist, and he also works with all the students on this end of it. But we syndicate to several, like 20-something different portals. But it's simple things that you would know, like RentLinks, Craigslist, Zillow. And when you put a property out and you basically say things like, having trouble qualifying during this chaos, or can't get a bank loan today, or your credit needs work. You put any of those headlines, you are hitting about 82% of the market, and now growing because of COVID, of buyers that can't get a loan today, but they're valid buyers. They just need time, help, and work. And so there is never a shortage of those buyers. Never.
I've read some disconcerting things regarding real estate recently, about, and again, this is all Reddit, haven't experienced it myself, but about extensions or and again, I haven't gotten into a ton of details, so it's mostly when what I'm talking about is like headlines or things I've heard from some people. They haven't hit me yet, but so in general, here's what I've heard, and I could be wrong on this, so correct me if I am. But it sounds like some states are becoming more lenient about when people stop paying, say, their rent, and then start squatting. But we're not talking about that here, are we? So that's not something we have to necessarily worry about, is it?
Actually, you sort of do, but here's why it's not as prevalent. This is another great, timely question. If you look at our entire network of associates doing deals, and there's like 90 of them around North America, plus us, I can count on a hand how many homes they had an issue with someone not paying. And it wasn't because they're a tenant and they go, oh, good, thank you. The government said I don't have to, so I don't have to. Now, most of those don't realize they're going to have to come up with it at the end or get thrown out. Ours are buyers that have an option on the property. So even though the tenant law does protect them if they unfortunately had a COVID, mishap, the law does protect them. We can't throw them out. But most of them do whatever they can do, and that's what we're seeing, because it's tied to an option. They're not just a rental.
Right.
Very, very, very important. So we had one home recently that we had to put it back on the market, open market, not rent-owned market, of a woman that serviced schools. And I forget what she did for a niche, but she serviced schools. So she's out. I mean, she has no income and she has no family that can help her. So unfortunately, she's in that 2 to 5% of the homes for us that don't get to the finish line because they have life events. But luckily, in our niche, we are dealing with buyers versus renters. So that's the anomaly, not the norm.
Got it. Okay. So I think structurally that's definitely different too, or different than kind of maybe what some people be used to, at least what I am when I think about real estate investing. Okay. That's fascinating. So you guys you haven't necessarily run into that as any kind of like hurdle or sticking point. It sounds like and again, I think because it's the buyer and with an option to own, right? It's like a self-mitigating factor almost in it. Like that person doesn't want to give that up. Is that kind of the context? So
yeah, it really was. And I can't tell you that piece of the model was vetted out, right? We know what happens when a buyer's a life event. We know which way we have to pivot, but we didn't know for certain. Nobody, of course, knew. Once COVID happened, okay, would they try to buy some time, or are they going to have to live true to their option? And they're living true because remember, they all put a non-refundable down payment down. Piece I said earlier. So why would they risk that? And they do risk it if the rental piece doesn't stay current and they don't have a valid, COVID mishap.
Yeah. So let's zoom in on this because there's a few questions I want to ask about this. So like what you're describing too, it sounds like you're the types of properties you're looking into, you probably whittle them down, like in terms of you're probably only looking for certain, I don't know, classes or levels or whatever it is. Like in the past, I've heard like A level, B level, C level. I don't know if that's for commercial investing, so are you looking for like high quality homes or like middle to high quality, high class? I don't know how you describe this or define this or categorize this, but is there a specific type of property that's like optimal for something like this? Because you said, no, the first thing you want to do is find the property. So like, I'm just thinking to myself, well, where should I look? Should I look local? Should I look more broadly? Are there any filters that I should use to search for something like this?
Okay. A few things in that one question. That was a bunch of cool things in there. So one is where to find it is always local. People say, well, can I work in a different market? Well, like wholesalers are used to that. They can work all over the country. Land people can work all over the country. There's no reason to in this niche. You work right around 50 miles from your house that you can drive to, and you get more than enough leads that you can possibly handle. And where do they come from? Expired listings, meaning for those not in real estate, those are listings that realtors had and they just couldn't sell them. Or for sale by owners are great, and for rent by owners are great. So that's the main sources. But remember what I said earlier: a really lucrative deal is the owner financing free and clear house. So you can buy that list. If you didn't have enough leads from those three, you can for $50 to $200 buy a list of free and clear properties and then target those too. So that's where they come from. And they are, yes, they are nice houses. So on occasion, you'll get one that needs work. We don't have to touch it. We can actually put a rental and buyer in there that's a handyman person. Those are easy and lucrative, but most of them are very nice moving home.
And you're typically doing like a single family residence up to like maybe a fourplex or something like that with deals like this?
Singles and twos are very easy to do. 4 to 10 we like for terms, but not for rent to own. That's buy it owner financing, run it like a regular building, improve the NOI. We've done several of those. The threes are kind of stuck in the middle because, in my opinion, they're not big enough to run as an income property, and they're not treated as that from a lending standpoint. They're treated as a residential. And then because it's 3 units, it's tough to say for family, can you take all 3 units? They can usually do 2. Yeah. It's an in-law situation, but 3 is tough. So we don't do 3s.
Okay, yeah.
Now, but can you do this, Tom, with anything? We bought our office building on terms. Can you buy a car, boat, plane, anything on terms? Yes. We just teach single families, and then whatever else comes our way, we help them do.
That's awesome. So let's say I want to get straight to the chase. So I'm just going to pay like a couple $100 to get the leads of houses that are free and clear. What's your process after that? Do you start cold calling? You start sending letters? Well, especially since we're doing this local, what's your approach?
Yeah, so the leads that I said earlier, the expired, FSBO, and for rent, we have a virtual assistant call those. We actually have a team of them that we've trained. So we use them, our students use them. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. If you're going to buy the list of free and clear, you're going to mail them likely a postcard or a handwritten type letter. It looks like a handwritten letter, but a postcard is what we've been using recently because of COVID. It's so easy to do it online and not have to mess with any services or any mail. And that's pretty inexpensive. I mean, you can mail a couple hundred. I'm not talking thousands and tens of thousands of dollars a month. I'm talking like mail 100 or 2 postcards every other month if that's the niche you want to go on. But we usually help people decide if they need to do that or want to do that.
And what are you trying to, what's the goal with this one? Kind of direct response style. We're trying to get them to like call a number on that postcard, call you back. And then like, so how do you take it from there?
Yeah, just to raise their hand. So if they raise their hand from the VA call or the postcard, then someone, in our case, it's my son-in-law, Zach, or our sales specialist that literally just came on. And if they're a new student, they're calling it back themselves. And the beginning conversation is simple. If you called me back because it got your attention, you don't really know what we're doing yet. My question to you would be, Tom, say you were an expired listing or free and clear, it doesn't matter. If you got your price, are you open to doing that on lease purchase or owner finance? They usually say, what is that? Or, no, I want a conventional sale. And we say, yeah, 99% of the population does. But right now, between COVID, the banking, the qualifications, that's not happening. So this is a great plan B. And then we explain why that's a great plan B. So if a person calls because they're relocating, they need the money, they have a family, they have to have that equity to buy a house, we're not the buyer. But every other scenario, we can help.
So let's say, so there is some sort of educational process here, I think, kind of built into this in terms of, because it's not a typical transaction process. So how many conversations do you think you have to have with, and I know that is completely variable and dependent, but what would you predict? Like, in terms of like how many conversations you have to have with people before somebody's like, yeah, let's do this. I'm interested in this lease purchase or owner financing.
I can give you the exact metrics. We track them. We highly suggest that the associates, who we call students, they track them. We speak once the virtual assistant procures a what we call a property lead sheet that basically was a seller like you that said, I guess so, or maybe like have someone call me, like nothing over the top motivated yet. They're just open. Once we speak to 11 of those, we're usually able to get an appointment, and albeit that's virtual now. But once we speak to 17 of those, we have a property under contract. And once we speak to 25 of those, we have a property that went under contract that's sold, has those 3 paydays. So long and the short of it is every 25 property information sheets that is generated, so leads, we're getting a sold deal. And so you can, when you have the metrics, it's not, I know that sounds boring to some people, but when you have the metrics and the data, now you have a business that's scalable and predictable. You're not winging it just as an operator or a solopreneur. That's fine to start that way. So I tell our students after 6 months, I want to know your numbers, but for now, borrow ours.
Yep. Do you, what's like, would you say like the administrative burden is for this? However you want to define that. Because like once I kind of wrap my head around the deal component, once I've like, say I'm getting this deal underway, like how hard is it to administer or manage once it's kind of gone through?
Okay, so when you buy yourself, which most start by themselves, and you're at that, okay, I'm trying to get my first deal point. There's not a heck of a lot to do except for phone work, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's okay. I always think it's easy to answer with an exact example. So I just interviewed someone for our podcast. We call it a family cast because it's one of our students. And here's the roadblock he ran into when we asked him about the same question you asked. He said, well, it's easy. I did my first one. And then I took two other properties under agreement. Then they sold one. Well, in between taking the three and selling one, the flood of buyer calls can be daunting. So we usually tell people after you've gotten to that like 3 or 4 deal mark, 3 seems to be the number that I suggest people. I tell them to bring on not a VA to call because you already have that, but a VA to help you administratively to keep you on the phones. And we've got the training for it, the automation for it. So all they have to do is make that move to do that. And as you probably know, VAs are fairly inexpensive. Even the great ones that we have in the US that are super trained, they're not over the top expensive relative to you going out and having time to get a $75,000 or $100,000 deal. You can justify that all day long, and we show you how to do that.
So let's zoom in on that. How you guys do things in particular, because we talked around it a little bit and zoomed in. But how do you guys work too? If somebody's listening is like, okay, I see you guys take care of some portion of this. How does that work? And how do people work with you? And what do you guys provide versus what is somebody else like? What would I have to take care of if I'm really interested in this concept? So yeah.
So where we differentiate ourselves, I have a shirt on if you're on video that says "Bridge the Gap." It's one of our themes, one of our missions, and that is, I think there's a lot of junk in the real estate education space that has mismanaged people's expectations. Like you can get rich tomorrow, and this is easy, and it's, $1 million in the next month. None of that's true. It's going to take time. So our role with the student is to provide as much support as possible because our mission of the company is to complete transactions. We have a set number, a set mission. The community knows it. So it's not about selling you a course. It's about, hey, if you're serious and committed, and that doesn't mean full time, most of my part time. If you're serious and committed about this niche, let's do deals, period. So we have a basic course that they can take online. Some do that and go run and do deals. If they want to do it more quickly, they team up with us and we revenue share on the deals with them, but we do the deals with them. So we're calling sellers with them. We're calling buyers with them. We're analyzing calls that they did. We are in the trenches with them until they do a certain number of deals. And then obviously they can fly,
And how does that structure work? Like if somebody was like, oh, I like number 2 because number 1 seems like, oh, I can never get around to studying the thing I want, or, I don't know. I feel like a lot of people have that challenge where it's like, the bottleneck is themselves almost. And it's like, oh, if somebody could help me with that, I'd be very enthusiastic by it. So how does somebody go, like you guys, I know you mentioned something about like 90 people you work with right now. Like what's your capacity? How does somebody come and work with you? Do they have to apply somewhere? How does it work?
Yeah, they have to apply. It's all application because we are super protective of what we call the wicked smart community. And the community appreciates it because they've made a commitment to do what they're doing in either the group coaching level or the individual coaching level, where either my son-in-law at one level or myself at the higher levels or a certified coach at one of the levels can help them. And so our capacity is scalability is easy because we've got, as the higher levels do deals, we certify some of them as coaches. And so they have a choice depending on what involvement they want and how serious they are. Obviously, this would be over a strategy call, but there's a group environment or there's a hands-on environment, even more so, like as needed as they do deals.
And you mentioned something a little bit about like how you guys kind of work with that person kind of more directly. So you guys are you like joint venture partners? Is this like a limited partnership, or I'm probably mixing up some terms here? So like, how does somebody actually go into that, and what should they expect to, I guess, what should they expect in that regard, like to the relationship? Like, are you guys going into deals together, or is it like them? Yeah. How does that work?
Yep. So we used to call it joint venture, coincidental to your question. And for legal reasons, we call it associates now. We're just associates because we're not on the deal.
Right.
When they find a deal on 123 Yellow Street, they put that contract in their own LLC name. We show them how to do it, obviously, but they put it in their LLC name. And then we're paid a revenue share as a consultant on that deal. And then there's a certain amount of deals where we call it capping out. So if you were a student at deal 10, for example, on one of the levels, you have no more obligation to do any revenue sharing with us. And frankly, by the time you do 10 deals, you're at most markets anywhere between 800 and 1.5 million in earnings in all three paydays, and you get it. You didn't do 10 deals with us and not get it. So that's why we come up with that number 10.
Got it. Very cool. Okay, so taking it back here in terms of like investing in this market too, I still think there's probably a lot of people who are find current events really disconcerting.
Yeah.
I feel like real estate's still strong, although of course when you hear things like like I mentioned earlier, we talked about, although I know that doesn't factor into the types of deals and types of arrangements you guys are structuring, but long term or even short term, what's your picture of the real estate market and investing in general?
Well, here's my deal on that. There's no magic answer, and the listeners are gonna like, okay, what's he gonna say? But the fact is, the billionaires don't know, the economists don't know. I had Jared Robbins coach me from January to June. He's Tony Robbins' son, and he very nonchalantly one day said to me, great second month of COVID, said, yeah, my dad, Tony, was sitting talking to Ray Dalio. I mean, you're talking big names. And he said, there's one thing certain, we all know for certain. There is that nobody knows. That's the only certainty. So what do I personally think? I think that it's not an opinion. COVID is kicking up in a lot of states. States are being shut down again. So it looks pretty like definitive that there's going to be shutdowns again everywhere. And so the real estate right now, there's some extreme urgency in the seller's market. Buyers are rushing with the rates and with COVID on the rise for the fall. They're rushing to buy. So great seller's market right now. But I think that's going to change again towards the fall when we go back to where we were in the spring, number one. Number two, all of these forbearances that were given on properties, if they weren't government backed, then they don't automatically put the payments on the back of the loan. They're due. Like now in August, they're due now. And I just was told a stat on my show, a guest told me this, said 30% of the mortgages in the United States right now are in forbearance from COVID. 30%. That means, you tell me all 30% didn't get hurt and they're going to be able to pay that now? They owe 3 months right now. No way. So that's a big problem. And if you're in real estate and you know how to fix it, in any industry, what do you get paid well to do? Help lots and lots of people provide value. That's how you get paid very well. So that's what we're positioned to do in this niche, thankfully. And so we have the opportunity to generationally affect families, if you think about it, like generationally, because it'll go the other way if we can.
Yeah. And with this model too, I know we mentioned like once you start, I think part of this is do you make money on the cash flow as well as the transaction? Is that right? Is that how it's structured?
Yeah, on our deals. Oh, with the students, you mean?
Yeah. Or for the student.
We make money on all three.
Yeah.
All three paydays. Just like our own deals, only it's with them and we get a small share.
Got it. So if somebody's coming into this, it would be a way for them. It's not necessarily like I do this like wholesaling or flipping or something like that, where it's just on that transaction. There's a possibility for producing cash flow through this kind of structure, like for that person who wants to get into this kind of investing, right? Like if I wanted to.
Oh yeah, big time. So that's that number I use. Like the two extremes are Claudia way out in Arizona averages like 45 or 50 grand all three paydays, and Bill in DC and Mike in California, they average like 150 to 250 per deal. That's one deal. So they're getting now money, cash flow monthly money, and then back end money. That's like for any business owner, that's the ideal cash flow setup. Think about it.
Yeah, and so with this, how difficult is it to? Would you say? I know you mentioned the metrics, because it's kind of an unusual process. I know these are unusual times, so I think people will be more apt to like have these conversations to figure out to make a deal happen on something like on their own property.
Yeah.
I guess I'm kind of still curious for that person. I know I'm going back a little bit on this here, but I was just curious, like, is this something that can be done part-time side hustle style, or is this like complex enough where I really have to kind of go all in to figure out how this works, and then even negotiating the transactions and stuff like that? Is it like a part-time, or am I looking at more like, no, this is will take up quite a bit of time?
No, most of our students I will say all of our students, with one exception, came to us as part-time. As of this week, and we just interviewed him on the podcast, we had our 7th student retire, quote unquote, from their job and go full-time real estate, which is really cool, especially during these times. So they come part-time, some stay part-time and love the value of, hey, I'll do 3 deals a year at $100 grand a pop, or whatever the number is.
All right.
And others say, all right, Chris, here's the deal. I can't stand my job, or now with COVID, I don't want to fly anymore, or whatever their deal is. I've heard it all. And can you help me structure a plan to have me out in a year, in 2 years, whatever it might be? So Brian today got on the podcast and said, on the show, he was talking to my son-in-law and I, he said, look, I've been at this company 17 years. When I joined you, my goal was to be done in 18 months and move over full time. That's a pretty lofty goal in and of itself. And then he moved it to a year, and then he moved it to now. He's giving his notice this month because of COVID. But that process took him 7 months. He's done 6 deals, and that's a game changer for him and his family. He doesn't have to get on a plane anymore. So long answer to your good question. Part-time is perfectly fine when we structure a strategy to make that work.
And with this structure too, this is all kind of transactional, right? Do you, in the context of what we've been describing or talking about, me, if I'm like want to get into this kind of investing, I'm not going to I don't end up owning anything, right? It's all effectively, I don't. In that regard, it minimizes my downside risk of ownership, right? Or am I capturing that correctly? Or are there cases where
half? So a third. So the lease purchase properties, you're never owning it, and you're never on a loan.
Yeah.
The owner financing, your entity is owning it, but you are not signing precedent still.
Right.
And there's a third way we buy that's more complex, but you would own it too. You want to own it, ideally. The sandwich leases are great for new people, because it takes literally no money. The ownership ones can take a teeny bit of money, because if I buy your house as a seller and I say, I'm not giving you any money down, Tom, who's going to pay the transfer tax? You can't expect them to do that. So we pay the transfer tax when we buy it on the financing with nothing.
Wow. So and that's mostly the case. Like you don't find that half the time you have to put some amount of money down on top of that. It's mostly just like paying those kind of transaction fees, so to speak.
Yeah, no, I mean, look, here's an example. Chad in Colorado lives like literally in the boonies. He lives in the mountains. He's done 4 deals. The first three were on a financing where he bought the property with his attorney. That day had the buyer come in, because we make these contingent upon a buyer. We'll just take these on. He had a buyer come in with a down payment. All 3 of them on financing deals, all 3 of them 6-figure deals. And he's new to real estate, but it took him about 9 months to get there, right? It takes time.
That's awesome. I also live in the boonies a little bit in the Colorado mountains. So now I'm thinking to myself, maybe I got to keep my eyes out, because it's like near impossible to get a property out here. Well, definitely, I think it's like impossible to get out some for less than $500,000. Although, when you look at the averages around here, as you go towards Aspen, it's like $1 million plus. So yeah, the numbers kind of check out.
Yeah, his were like 450 to 650, which is a really cool range because you got a nice down payment.
Yeah, and it doesn't get into balloon loan. I guess that wouldn't even matter here anyway. Interesting.
Some states, I don't know yours, but they all have a limit. It just matter what it is.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Well, not a lot of lawyer here, guys. So go find your own lawyer on that. Go check this stuff. But no, this has been fascinating. So Chris, I know there's a real estate book that people should pick up. It's called Real Estate on Your Terms. And I know people could pick this up. It's an Amazon bestseller. You can go to Amazon.com and search for Chris Prefontaine or Real Estate on Your Terms and find it, pick it up. I've read through it. I think it's a solid book, and I think it's worth owning. Especially if you're getting into real estate investing, I think there's a lot of stuff, even if you didn't want to go this model, say, there's useful information in there and useful knowledge. Is there anything that we haven't covered here that you think would be pertinent to anybody who's, again, most of the audience here will probably be looking and doing this probably part-time, maybe as a side hustle or something like that. Mm-hmm. And maybe a lot of them haven't gotten into real estate at all. Any final thoughts or words of advice for them, somebody who's just getting started in this space?
Yeah, again, fresh on mind, the guest I had on my show and I talked about this, and that is, I don't care what niche you're going to go into, because I'm not so naive to think, yep, this is the only niche. No, of course not. There's great niches in real estate that are booming right now, and there's some that are hurting. It doesn't matter what niche. What does matter is 2 things. One is look into whatever niche on YouTube, there's free sources to do that. The book, the webinar, go look cheap or free. Then once you find the niche, find someone who's actively doing what you want to do and has achieved what you want to achieve, like actively. They're not a marketer. It's not a has-been. And then the third piece is super important. And that is they've gone through at least one economic cycle, which means they probably went through that plus a curveball of some sort like COVID, not COVID clearly, but like 9/11, the economic cycles. I've been through 4. And it's important because you do not learn from success. You learn nothing from success. In fact, they can be scary because you get too cocky. You learn from the storms and the cycle. And so make sure you're attaching to that. That's all.
I love it. And where can people reach out to find you, learn more about you, or connect with you?
They can go to smartrealestatecoach.com if they don't mind listening to me babble for another hour. There's a free webinar. I'm big on free. And they can just go through that. And there's good content in it. It's not going to teach you how to make $1 million. It's going to take what you and I talked about, put it on the screen, put numbers to it, and allow you to say, okay, I do want to learn more, or no, that's not for me.
I love it. I think it's fantastic. So go check it out, guys. Listen, I still think, I personally believe in real estate still. And I think, I don't know, I don't want to predict the future, but I think it's a strong position to be in. At least dabble in it a little bit. I think this is a good way to get started. So go check it out. Real Estate on Your Terms, for the book on Amazon. And you guys can, of course, search Chris Prefontaine. Any relation to the Prefontaine that broke the 4-minute mile?
No,
Do you get that a lot?
Yeah, we get it all the time. I have a brother, Steve, but he's alive and well, and no relation. But I love the story. Yeah. I love the book. I love the movie.
You're breaking your own 4-minute miles here with this real estate investing. It's fantastic. Well, thank you, Chris, for being on In the Trenches. It was a real pleasure having you. Thank you for sharing your insights.
Thanks, buddy. Appreciate you having me.
Of course. And that wraps up another broadcast of In the Trenches. If you enjoyed today's episode, please leave a rating review. Just go to tommorkes.com/iTunes, and that'll take you to iTunes where you can leave a 5-star rating review. And that really helps spread the word about this podcast. And finally, if you need help growing your online business or generating new traffic, leads, and sales at a profit, reach out to me at tom@tommorkes.com or head over to the website tommorkes.com and sign up for the free newsletter.